What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Rance, Joe Johnson's, John Raffs, of course. We've got Jays. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
I almost feel like the college basketball schedule is what's telling me it's almost Christmas. It just doesn't feel like it. But this is always the big Saturday before things sort of calm down and now conference play is going to start. I feel like this is, I don't know, usually I feel more Christmas energy. And I don't know. But this day is always amazing on the college basketball schedule. And it's a reminder that, yeah, we are in fact halfway through December and Christmas is, just over a week away.
Yeah, we used to have, the week that we had last week where basically nobody plays each other, and then this Saturday, and then another 7 days. That kind of how it used to be when most teams were playing 18 game conference schedules, and a lot of the conferences didn't start playing until there were a lot of conference games on like December 30th or December 29th.
27th,
And
28th, yeah.
right. And now that we play 20 conference games because every conference has a million teams in it, they have to start playing conference games, on December 20th before Christmas. You have to get one in if you still want to play conference championships in the first week of March and still want to have the national championship game in the first week of April. So it's there's not as much of a pause as there used to be. It feels like. I mean, that kind of 2 week stretch with one day in between really was like you know, Sunday of last week was solid. Saturday, Sunday, and then there was 4 days, and then on Friday you had Gonzaga and Yukon, and then of course what we'll talk about, there and what happened on Saturday. So it you're right. It's also you also felt like you could take a breath after this kind of December 18th,
Mm.
19th Saturday that we have before, then you have Christmas, and then you really get into it after Christmas. But we are hours away at this point from the beginning of conference play pretty much across the board.
Yeah. Everybody's kind of taking Monday off to rejuvenate, and then Tuesday we hit the ground running.
Indeed. We got 5 games that we're going to talk about today, just kind of bounce around, uh, mainly from a big Saturday in college hoops. But where we're going to start is in the Pacific Northwest, the PNW, the Continental Tire Seattle tip-off, sure, where number 5 Yukon took on number 10 Gonzaga. The Huskies are now 10-1 on the season after a 76-63 win over Mark Few's Bulldogs. If I'm keeping count correctly, Josh, that is the second double-digit win for the Huskies over the Gonzaga Bulldogs, over the Zags, in this calendar year. They met on March 25th in the NCAA tournament. That did not go well for Gonzaga. This one more competitive than that 82-54 game was back in March, but nonetheless, a Yukon team that I think we all went into Friday thinking was better than Yukon, proving just that in Seattle on Friday night.
It would have been difficult for it to have gone worse. So, yeah, that NCAA tournament game is kind of a disaster.
Indeed.
But yeah, that there's not too much to dive into here. The better team won. Donovan Clingan was really, really good. The couple of things for me on the Gonzaga side, when Graham Ike and Nolan Hickman are not playing well, they're going to have a hard time beating the best teams in the country.
Yeah.
Anton Watson, Ryan Nembhard had 35 points combined. So that's over half of your scoring. It's just not enough. They need everybody playing at a high level if they are going to. They're clearly very good. They're probably better than generally people expected. They're clearly the class of that conference because St. Mary's has fallen apart here. Maybe they get it together and make a run at the conference title. We'll see. But as of now, they're clearly above everybody else, as they always are. But this is not a where does Gonzaga rank among the best teams in the country? This is a does Gonzaga even belong in that category? Which is not typically the case. It's kind of a strange spot.
They've played 2 teams this year that they would normally be in the conversation with in Purdue and Connecticut, and they've looked like a team that's just not on the same level
Right.
both times,
Exactly. Yeah.
which is fine. That's not the way, very few programs, almost 0 programs, and I think maybe we forgot about that with Gonzaga after the last, 5 or so years. I mean, you could even go all the way back to 2017 with the Nigel Williams-Goss team. This run for Gonzaga has been uniquely elite, even for a program like Gonzaga. And like you said, like this Gonzaga team's probably a little better than they get credit for, which is interesting because there are probably some years in there where those teams weren't as good as people thought they were. And this team probably doesn't get the benefit of the doubt the way that even last year's team did. And that's okay. They just don't like they either have like a truly elite starting five in Spokane or they have such a good group of guys that Andrew Nimhart is coming off the bench,
Right.
and they have neither of those things this
Right.
year.
And Steel Ventures immediately getting hurt did not help with that because
Right.
that's taken a major piece out of that rotation and putting more pressure on everybody else. Yeah.
Right. And so now you have to slot a guy like Dusty Schramer in there who is fine, at 6.5 points, 4.3 rebounds, 1.5 assists. He's not shooting it well at all. But he will eventually be a very good Gonzaga player, I think. As we get deeper, I mean, 8-6 is, he's being an impactful freshman, but a Gonzaga team that would have the best year possible would have had a guy like him coming off the bench. And of course, the bench in this particular game is 2 of 7 from the field. Really, you only had 2 guys come off the bench. And in this particular year, the elite of the elite in college basketball have a dominant big man, and that's something that Gonzaga has had for years now. Um, from a couple different iterations, you go from Brandon Clark to the big man that was on the 2017 team. I'm forgetting
Chris
his last name.
Karnowski.
Yes, thank you. And then, of course, you go into Drew Timme, who's one of the best big men in Gonzaga program history. Chet Holmgren, of course, sprinkled in there, and they don't really have that this year. Either, I think they're clearly very good. And to your points, they might not lose, which would be interesting. Yeah. That this is pretty easily the worst Gonzaga team of the last 5 years, and they probably have. They have a pretty good chance of going undefeated in the West Coast Conference right now, based on what I've seen from who was supposed to be the other teams kind of nipping at their heels once we get to conference play.
Yeah. Yukon side, real quick. It's a really good sign that you can be that good. And Tristan Newton scored 9 points.
Kind of backed into a traditional point guard role.
Right. Tristan Newton obviously can go score 30 when he needs to. But this is the balance of, okay, when they got to expose a team that doesn't have a lot of interior, Graham Ike is supposed to be that guy. When Graham Ike doesn't have a good game and not much of an impact, and Donovan Clingan gets to go to work.
And respectfully, Graham Ike is 6'9". It's just different.
Yeah, that part of it too. Clingan got to go to work. All of a sudden, you don't need Tristan Newton. They can kind of share that load. You have multiple guys. They're so well balanced. That was the other thing that stood out because Newton has been so good in most of their big games so far. They didn't need him in this one because everybody else got the job done, and he just did his thing, took care of the basketball, made some plays, but didn't need to go score 20 points.
The last question I have about Yukon, the very last question is Donovan Clingan's, I knew Donovan Clingan could dominate a game like this when the biggest guy on the other team is 6'9". I knew that.
Yeah.
He's 3 of 7. He was 3 of 8 from the field against Kansas and 3 of 7 from the field against North Carolina. First team All-America caliber big men on those 2 teams. Of course, the matchup against Hunter Dickinson is probably even more interesting. But when he is the headline, and when they go up against teams like the Creighton Blue Jays that have a guy like Ryan Kalkbrenner, I'll be curious how effective he is against a team like Marquette, where Oso Ighodaro is not the type of big man that. It's just not he just doesn't have obscene size the way that some of those other big men do. That's my last question. How Klingon, and it's more of a March question than anything else, but like at some point, UConn's probably going to run into a team with an elite big man if they're going to go to the Final Four again, and they might need Klingon to just like be awesome against another awesome big. We haven't seen that yet. That's fine. Like I said, it's December 17th, and he had the warm, soft blanket of playing behind Adama Sanogo last year. So like this is a learning process, but that's my last like real thing that I can point to in terms of, okay, what are the reasons why the Huskies can't go back to back this year?
Yeah. Well, it's also a Big East question, I would argue, in terms of how do they stack up with Creighton and Marquette.
Sure, but we also watched UConn struggle in
Yeah.
the Big East last year. I don't really care what they do in the Big East.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
They literally forgot how to win a game for 3 weeks in the middle of conference play, and then we're still clearly the best team in the country in March.
Right. Yeah. I do think that could be one of the things that ends up determining who wins the Big East regular season, is whether Klingon can deliver in those games, specifically against those two teams with two different matchup situations there, as you were laying out.
Yeah, I think you're right. Connecticut, they roll 10-1. The only loss is on the road at Kansas. They beat Gonzaga 76-63 in Indianapolis. By the way, did you see that the last time that Purdue beat a number one team was like 30 years ago in Indianapolis against Arizona?
I did. It was 2000, right? I think.
How crazy is it that like saying almost 30 years ago when it was 2000 is like not like it's still a semi ridiculous thing to say, but like it's been 24 years. That's a little alarming. Anyways, number 3 Purdue, number 1 Arizona, Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the Indy Classic. I mean, you can tell me that this was a better game than the potential Notre Dame versus Butler game that you would have gotten in the Crossroads Classic, whatever. But instead, you get this one. It was a 92-84 win for Purdue. We'll get into this game specifically here in just a second, Josh. But here's what Purdue has done in this season, where people are like not totally convinced by Purdue, and we're like, what's wrong with Purdue? Can they win a national championship? What's going on? Here's what they've done since November 6th. They beat Xavier 83-71. They beat Gonzaga 73-63. They beat Tennessee 71-67. They beat Marquette 78-75. They in very Big Ten on the road at Northwestern lost to Northwestern. They beat and now they've gone on a 3-game streak where they've beaten Iowa by 20, Alabama on a neutral, and Toronto, and now Arizona 92-84. According to KenPom, they are 3rd in the country in strength of schedule. They are 10-1. They are absolutely, they are an absolutely elite college basketball team. And when you get the shooting from Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith like you did yesterday, there is not, and I mean this with my whole heart, there's not a team in the country that can beat Purdue when those two guys play like that.
Yeah, 100%. This is the flip side to the fact that they are always vulnerable if they don't shoot the 3 well, and if they turn the ball over, no matter who they're playing. This is what I've been saying from the beginning of what happens if they make their shots.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that Arizona played poorly. There are some things that I would have liked to see more of, and we'll get to that. But this game was just, and I know Arizona did kind of claw their way back into it, but it was basically over at halftime because Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith, and specifically Fletcher Lawyer, couldn't miss. I'm right there with you. They can just reach a level, and this is why I continue to believe in them, that nobody else can reach when they are playing well. And even their playing terrible nearly beat a borderline top 25 team on the road in Big Ten play. There's just no reason to freak out about that. It happens. Now, there's a different conversation about March, as we always keep saying, don't need to relive that here. But that was what I was thinking about. Well, I mean, they had 3 players score more than 9 points. They scored 92. And I actually kind of like the balance of the guards because Braden Smith has been consistently good. And Fletcher Lawyer just...
Stop. Braden Smith's been great.
Great.
Not
sure,
good.
Fair enough.
Braden Smith is an all-American caliber guard thus far.
Fair enough.
Full stop.
He's been great. Sure. Fletcher Lawyer, you just kind of don't know what you're going to get. But when it happens, he's scoring 25, and then it's just kind of game over. He's had some bad games, he's had some good games, but that balance of you feel really good about Braden Smith, and you know what Fletcher Lawyer can give you on any given night. Plus, of course, you've got Zach Edey. I still remain incredibly confident in this team. They're the best team in the country. The one thing I will say on the negative side of this, and I said this even coming out of last season, I think, if I am playing these guys, I am putting as much pressure on the ball as I possibly can. I am throwing them different defenses. I'm doing whatever I can to mess with the rhythm and to disrupt what they are doing. Because Arizona went to that 2-3 zone. It worked. They pressed. They got some turnovers. That's part of the reason why they were able to make that run to get back in the game, because you saw the bad decision making again. It is still there. But if you don't actually make them make tough decisions all the time and make them continuously think and put pressure on them, they're going to pick you apart. And it doesn't matter how good your defense is. They can still score 90 points on you because they're just that good when they're hitting shots.
It's really hard to do that for 40 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's part of the pressure they put on you, right? That's why they're so good.
I don't have a ton more on Purdue. Like this, like I think, like I don't think anyone's like Braden Smith, in my opinion, is about 4 levels better than he was a year ago. In terms of like a year ago, Braden Smith could be like they could part the Red Sea for him to the basket, and he still would hesitate to go score the basketball.
Yep.
And that wasn't like Fletcher Lawyer's been confident in his scoring abilities, whether he should or not, on every single night.
Correct.
Since he stepped onto Purdue's campus.
Yes.
So him going out and scoring 27 in a big game and then saying something to the effect of, it's difficult to score like that when you're not athletic. That's basically what he said in the post game. And that's hilarious. Braden Smith was not capable of putting 26 up a year ago. And this isn't the only time he's done it. I mean, he put up 26 against Arizona. He put up 27 against Alabama, and he's now scored in double figures in all but 2 of their games. One of them was a win against Tennessee, where Zach Edey and Fletcher Lawyer combined. I was
say that was the other Fletcher Lawyer game. Yeah.
Sorry, 50 combined for 50. Fletcher Lawyer had 27. Zach Edey had 23. So they didn't really need him to do that in that game. And the other game in which he had 2 points and a 19-point win over Iowa, where I just don't really care. He had eight assists and 1 turnover in that game. Like that's like, you just don't need that much to beat Iowa this year. And the other 4 guys in the starting lineup were all in double figures in that particular game. So like, I'm to the point with Braden Smith where I think he understands the context of his role with the ball in his hands. Of course, there are some decision-making things that need to get better. Really just decision-making when he's flustered. Like, I mean, it's not all decision-making. It's just decision-making when he's flustered, which is the most important decision-making. It's like saying that a quarterback makes great decisions when it's not 3rd and 8. Like, I need you to make good decisions. Right. I need you to make good decisions when it's 3rd and 8. But I think he's shooting it incredibly well. 47.5% from the 3-point line. That's top 70 in the entire country individually. I just don't think we're going to have a game this year where Zach Edey has 24 and nobody else has more than 9. I think Braden Smith, whatever happened this offseason, however Matt Painter got to his head in a good way, that I think Braden Smith understands the context of what his role needs to be when it needs to be there this year. And I think that's a good thing. Obviously it's a good thing, but yeah, playing 2 teams with explosive offenses like Alabama and Arizona do, and Braden Smith combining for 53 against those 2 across those 2 games, that's I think that's a real thing. And of course, so a lot of these things we can't get the final answer to until March, but those are some of the reasons that you can maybe believe that when they aren't shooting the ball especially well against some mid-major they should never lose to early in the tournament, that maybe they won't lose to him this year, because clearly The issue is not the elite teams that they play.
Mhm.
They have no issues beating the best
Right.
teams that they play. They don't lose to elite teams in March, which is part of the frustrating part. They don't lose to those teams. The only team they've lost to in March that they should have lost to in the last 5 years won the national championship.
And they probably shouldn't have lost.
And they should have beat them. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's clear. That's not the issue here. The issue is making sure that they have systems in place to not lose a silly game that they shouldn't. And Braden Smith understanding when it's time for him to take some control and be really aggressive as a scorer off of a pick and roll. That's one of those systems that can be in place.
You're absolutely right that his approach and his mindset is totally different.
Yeah.
And it is
I haven't gone back and looked, but I want to see like how many more shots he's taken at this point this year than last year. I haven't gone back and looked yet, but I'm sure it's significant.
And Matt Painter's been very transparent about that. We need him to take more shots. And that's what he's doing. Yeah. They're just a better team. They are a significantly better team than last season. I firmly believe that.
I think you're right.
And on the Arizona side, it's problematic with those guards when you don't win the guard battle.
Sure. They're not going to lose it very many times, but they did on Saturday.
And it's not necessarily because the guards were bad. I mean, Caleb Love has been really, really good this season. And he was really good in this game. Now, the problem
he also made a couple of shots that he always takes down the stretch. There were a couple that I was like, yep, that's Caleb Love shot. Several of them went in, but yeah, he's been. I have no negative things to say about Caleb Love on this.
The one that struggled was Kylan Boswell.
Yeah,
and usually that's more than enough what they got because you had two guys combined for 53, but the rest of your starting lineup had 29. You got 2 points off your bench. Again, that is not good enough to beat Purdue when Purdue's guards are playing that well.
Right.
Because you don't really have an answer to Zach Edey. So that was the other thing I wanted to point out that, again, it's not like Arizona played poorly, but they had important players who didn't have great games, and you can't really say that about Purdue because their 3 most important players were all phenomenal.
Yeah, and just real quick for Kylan Boswell, I mean, that was really the first. Like at some point, everybody's going to have one. You know what I mean? Like,
he's been sensational.
Like at Duke, he might have been the best guard on the floor.
Yeah,
in a game that had Jeremy Roach, Caleb Love, Pell Larson, and I don't know who else was in that game. But like just those 3 guys, like Kylan Boswell was the best guard on the floor, and has been rock solid in all of Arizona's other big games. Yeah, you're going to have one at one point, but that's a good point that you know, the floor that comes with Umar Ballo is really high. It's perhaps not, but it's not quite as high as it was last year when you also had Tubella. It's like the way that you could dominate a game on the interior. That's just, again, they have an elite backcourt. It's one of the best 3 in the country, if not the best. But you're right. On this particular night, they did not win that battle, and they just didn't quite have enough.
It almost further validated to me, though, that they really are this good. I continue to be willing to move their ceiling up higher and higher. That I just didn't think they had the firepower to hang with the best teams in the country. And I'm being forced to admit that I was just wrong. Now, because nobody's winning this game. They probably came as close as you could to winning this game. You're just not beating Purdue when Purdue plays that well. It's that simple.
Yeah. Purdue in Indy, 23 years removed from their last win over a number 1 team in the country, beats a number 1 team in the country, the same number 1 team in the country, 92-84. Death, taxes, and Matt Painter. All right, Josh. If I asked you to tell me, if I asked you to go through the list of games from Saturday and asked you to pick a game that was going to be 24 points in the direction that you weren't expecting, how many games would you go to before you got to Michigan State beating Baylor 88-64? Maybe that's not fair because that would probably like fit that criteria pretty
I was going to say,
but maybe the best way to do it to say it is this. If I said, okay, there's a game that's going to end 88-64, how many times would you have to guess before you got to Michigan State beat
Beating
Baylor
Baylor, right.
88-64?
I saw Seth Davis say, "I'm not surprised by the the actual score. I'm surprised at where the teams ended up on the scoreboard."
Yeah.
That was a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I would have picked. I probably it would have been the second last one I picked after Kansas IU of the games we're going to talk about here.
Hmm.
Maybe I would have considered Yukon Gonzaga.
Maybe. Yeah. That's
Maybe.
fair.
But
Well,
those
that's
would
what
be the
happened.
only ones. Yeah.
Well, that's what happened at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit, Michigan, on a neutral court, neutral-ish. Does Kim Pom have it semi-home? I wouldn't be surprised if it's a
I would
semi-home
hope
game.
so.
Let's see. Let's find Michigan State. It was a semi-home
Yeah.
game, so fine. Semi-home game at Little Caesars in Detroit. Tyson Walker had 25. The ghost of AJ Hoggard showed up with 14. He had some actual contributions from first-year players. You shoot the three ball extremely well, 8 of 12 from the three-point line, 63% from the floor. And for the first time this season, it looks like the Michigan State team that was advertised before the year began. No matter how you spin it, a striking victory for the Spartans.
It's amazing what happens when you make shots. I mean, they just haven't made shots outside of Tyson Walker all season.
Mm-hmm.
And they made shots. And it was the obvious question coming out of this is, right, is everything fixed? Is this the turning point? Are they going to look like this the rest of the season? They're going to now become the team everybody thought they were supposed to be. Not quite there yet.
Do it twice, and then I'll consider having the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't think we need to overreact to this, but from a resume standpoint, this was incredibly important. Because at some point you have to make up for the fact that you don't really have any wins of note because you've lost all. I mean, the schedule's really good, but they lost all of them. And for the fact that you're 0-2 in Big Ten play. At some point, no matter how good your schedule is, you have to actually win games.
Kim Pom has them projected to go 19-12 and finish 11-9 in the Big Ten right now. I would be surprised if it ends up that bad. But if it does end up that bad, having a win against Baylor might be the difference between you not getting into the tournament and you getting into the tournament.
Right. I think if they get to 18, 19 wins, they'll be fine because of the schedule. But
I mean, if they lose this game and go 11-9 in Big Ten play, I wholeheartedly disagree.
Right. I was talking after this game. Yeah,
that's the point.
Yeah.
That was the point.
Right. Yeah, that this is now the thing to build your resume around. Right, that it gives you a little bit of breathing room. That okay, we just need to be in the 500 ballpark in Big Ten play, and at least we're going to give ourselves a chance heading into the tournament.
Yeah,
which is doable even at 0-2. And just to get some confidence and go, oh, we really can be this good. Maybe people weren't completely wrong about us. That part of it too.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me here is that it's in there somewhere.
Yep.
Because it didn't look like it was in there.
Yep.
Like it's one thing to start slow. You know, like Tennessee is 8-3, and at one point was 4-3, but not for a single second did I debate whether or not it was in there.
Right.
I still think Tennessee, and after they left Maui 4-3 with losses to Purdue, Kansas, and North Carolina. I still thought that Tennessee had was capable of a Final Four run.
Yeah, right. Nothing has changed. They just lost some close games to really good teams. Yeah.
Right. And then they have a win over Illinois. They have a win over NC State. It's 8-3, top 7 at Kim Pom, and as they continue to look like a team that could go to the Final Four. Michigan State went from a team capable of going to the Final Four to a team that I was questioning whether or not they were capable of making the tournament, period. And I don't say this to say that now I think that Michigan State can go to the Final Four again. We'll have to we'll hold off on that one. But this is like there wasn't a performance in the vicinity in the like you would like we'd need to take a 3-hour drive from the second best performance of the year from Michigan State
Right.
to get to this performance. So whether or not it sticks around, like if you told me that this was the jumping off point, I'd be okay, sure. If you also told me that this was they caught lightning in a barrel one time and they're going to finish 19-12, I'd also like, okay, sure. It could be either one.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure that the ceiling that we had heard about for this Michigan State team existed even kind of.
Yep.
And on Saturday, we were shown that it does indeed exist. It's just a matter of how many times over the next 3 months can we get anywhere close to that ceiling.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever seen Scott Drew that frustrated. Maybe you can count the number of occasions on one hand, at least recently in the past decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
Jaden Nunn and Ray J. Davis, 6 turnovers apiece. We brought this up before. They defensively, they're not what they used to be, which means your offense has to be really good.
Mm-hmm.
They have the talent, obviously. There's a reason that they were undefeated in top, what were they, 6th in the AP poll?
They were 6th in the AP poll, yes.
Yeah. There's a reason for that. But this is the vulnerability, and you don't have a way to fix it other than taking care of the basketball because you can't win games 68-64.
Yeah.
Right. They needed to be able to score in the 90 range to have a chance because Michigan State was shooting the lights out.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, they turned the ball over a bunch. They just continued to feed the momentum. They let Cohen Cargo have a spectacular dunk in transition, and it just completely fell apart in the first half. That's my one hesitation with this team is, and this is just one of my things because we were talking about it with Purdue too, but at least Purdue has some other alternatives here. Baylor is just very built around this offense at this point and built around the guards. You can't have them turning the ball over 6 times a piece.
Yeah, this was a thought that I had against Auburn, actually.
Yeah, I think that's when we talked about it. Mm-hmm.
About Ray J. Dennis in particular. And then he went and he had like the best game of the season against Florida, but like Baylor's just kind of been beaten up on teams they're supposed to beat up on since that Auburn win. And Ray J. Dennis, like you look back on that game and that game looks like 15 points on 6 of 10 shooting, 7 assists. Oh, sorry, no, 2 assists and 7 turnovers. So like if you're just like glancing, that doesn't jump off the page. If you look a little bit deeper, he looked like overwhelmed in the first half of that game. And it's kind of not something that's needed to be talked about because like he's made a college basketball living on beating up on other mid-major guards. So it's definitely something I'll be looking at as we get into Big 12 play is if those guys continue to grow up when it comes to facing high major guards night in and night out.
Yeah.
Last thing on Michigan State. Part of the reason this is so frustrating is like Tyson Walker is so good that you just don't need anybody to be spectacular. Like you just don't like AJ Horgard. I made the joke about the ghost of AJ Horgard showing up when that's the tune of 14 points on 5 of 10 shooting. Like it's not like he went 9 of 12 from the field and was 5 of 6 from the 3-point line. And like, I like just anybody off the bench, like you got a lot of contribution off the bench, but like when I'm talking about, hey, how about freshman year Xavier Booker? Can you like impact the game in any way? I don't need you to have like 16 points and 4 blocks and 8 rebounds. How about 7 points on 3 of 3 shooting? I'd love for Xavier Booker to not go over in every other category.
I hope he gets more minutes. I'm not exactly understanding what Izzo's doing with that.
But it's like Like, they looked like this, and, like, Jaden Akins, Manny Sissoko, and Malik Hall were 2 of 2, 1 of 2, and 2 of 6 from the field. Like Tyson Walker is one of the ultimate, like, floor guys in the game this year. He's
Yep.
going to be there every single night. He had 25, 5 and 4, 9 of 16 shooting, 4 of 4 from the three-point line. You get 1 or 2 guys on the bench to, like, give you somewhere between 8 and 11. You know, Carson Cooper had 8, and Trey Holloman had 11 and was 2 for 3 from the three-point. That's the thing with Michigan State that was so frustrating, was like, I don't need AJ Hoggard to be an all-American level guy. You've got that guy. I just need guys to be consistent, to make your open shots, and for, like, the collectively just enough to, like, lift Tyson Walker enough, because he's going to show up, and he's going to show up in big games. He's done it literally the entire time he's been in East Lansing. And he did it again against Baylor. He just needs, like, we just need the rest of the guys to be solid. Like, find 4 guys every game among the, like, 9 guys that you have that are, like, Division I high major caliber college basketball players to show up, and you're probably going to win a good amount of games because Tyson Walker is that good.
Yeah. You just can't have him be the most important player in the country.
Right.
That
Because
was
there's
what it
only
was
one
looking
guy.
like.
Because there's only one guy in the country that's capable of being the most important player. That's capable of being the most important player in the country.
Yeah.
And even that guy's team is frustrating when the
Yep.
rest of his teammates don't look good.
Yep.
88-64 at the Little Caesars at the Mid Pizza Arena. Moving on. Kentucky, 87-83 over North Carolina. The freshman Kentucky experience continues. In case you're not keeping count, the Kentucky Wildcats are 8-2. They have wins over Miami of Florida in a 22-point fashion. They have a win over North Carolina on a neutral. They almost beat Kansas on a neutral. And they also have a loss to UNC Wilmington. And they also needed overtime to beat St. Joseph's. The freshman experience continues. On Saturday, it was awesome. 87-83 at the CBS Sports Classic. Shout out. You had 4 guys in double figures. All 4 of them are freshmen. 87-83. And Calipari's Wildcats continue to be must-see television in 2023.
I'm sold.
He's sold, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm all in on this team.
He's all in on this team.
It's funny because I think Cal is very, very smug about this. That he gets, right, because he gets irritated when people question him and everybody wants him fired because they're not winning national championships every year and all the stuff that comes with being Kentucky's coach, right?
Some of it is fair, but continue.
Yes, sure. We don't need to get into that conversation. I'm just saying that's where Cal is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the comments coming out of this game, things like, I feel pretty good about where we're at. He knows he's got something. He is very, very pleased with what he thinks he can get out of this group. That's not something you could say in years past, the last couple. They also just look like a much more modern basketball team, which is a very strange and basic thing to say. But
they're 23rd in tempo. They're 5th in 3-point shooting. They are top 55 in the country in assists to field goal made percentage.
Super athletic.
Super athletic. Yeah. They do a lot of things that freshman built teams don't. They typically don't do that. They do a lot of struggling from the 3-point line at the next level. They do a lot of turning the ball over, typically. Not just Kentucky, just like freshmen, teams that lean on freshmen a lot in general. This Kentucky team does none of those things.
And there was, I think Cal even said something after the game about, somebody asked something about getting these bigs implemented. We'll get to them next. But how that's going to work. And he goes, you think we're going to stop running? We're not going to stop running. That's what you have to do now. You got to be able to space the floor. You got to have 3-point shooters.
Yeah.
And I went, where was that philosophy the past 2 seasons?
No clue. Well,
now, again,
the answer to that question is probably we had Oscar Tshiebwe.
Right. And Aaron Bradshaw is a very, very different kind of player than Oscar Tshiebwe.
Yeah.
Really impressed with him. This is the reason I'm sold. I wanted to see what this looked like with the bigs. And it's not all there yet. They've played all of one game with 2/3 of them. So this is going to take some time still. And he needs to, of course, like every freshman, learn to play defense without fouling. That was an issue that basically kept him out of 2/3 of the second half. Because I think he picked up his fourth with 16 minutes left or something.
Sure.
But he did all of the guys did a terrific job on Baycott. He doesn't have to score the basketball. Now he's a threat. He's going to get some offensive rebounds. He's going to do something. He's going to score. But they just need to guard the paint because everybody else is going to take care of the scoring. And Reed Sheppard might be their best player. He's coming off the bench because they don't need him to start. Antonio Reeves didn't score in the first half. It didn't matter. Everybody else was. Rob Dillingham got going. They're just so balanced. And they're only going to get better. But to me, the big question was always, you see the potential. What does this look like when they actually have the size and are using this team the way it's supposed to be built? And what you're seeing is a team that has an awful lot of potential and is doing a lot of things that you don't necessarily, to your point, expect out of a team built around freshmen and inexperienced players. They don't hurt themselves, generally speaking. The one game they did was Kansas, and they've learned from it because UNC made a run to get back into this game. They took the lead. It looked like it might fall apart again, and they answered with some big plays from a variety of players, mostly freshmen, to hold on to the win. Getting that kind of win is also a big confidence boost because they had Kansas too, and it fell apart.
They should have beat Kansas.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why you play those games in November and December so that you get those experiences and you can learn from them come March. And that's exactly what you're seeing here is the evolution of this team.
If Armando Bacot only takes 4 shots in 31 minutes again, Hubert Davis should be fired. See ya. Goodbye.
And that was the other part of this for me.
If Cormac Ryan ever takes 3 times more shots, respectfully to Cormac Ryan, who was good in this game.
Who had a great game. Yeah,
had a great game. That's not what it's not really about Cormac Ryan. But this was an issue last year too. Like it is like one of the more physically dominant players in the entire country against a freshman, against Aaron Bradshaw and Trey Mitchell. Like Bubba Cunningham should fire Hubert Davis. I don't actually mean that, but the answer is like right in front of you. Like I don't.
No. To be fair, and this is where I was going back and forth on this watching the game too. Is Bacot was touching the ball more than his shots and field goal attempts suggest. He drew a bunch of fouls too.
Yeah, but he shot 4 free throws, so that can only be so true. Like that, he shot 4 free throws. He forced 2 fouls, essentially.
Well, it was a lot of specifically Bradshaw's 4th foul. It was just fighting for position, and Bacot beat him, and so he had to foul. It was those kind of things where it was just an inbound. It wasn't him even necessarily having the basketball, but he was more of a focal point, I would argue, than those field goals suggest. I still generally agree with your point that he needs to be more of a factor because that was the thing that stood out to me is, the guards were phenomenal, and it still didn't really matter because Kentucky just won the interior battle, and that's not something that can happen. That should happen when you have Armando Bacot in there.
To be like semi-fair, Bacot's been pretty average this year. He hasn't been very good. He was 3 of 9 against Arkansas. He was 4 of 10 against Villanova. He was 4 of 12 against Yukon. Like he hasn't been awesome. So I'm not really serious about any of those things that I just said in terms of like moving to like a movement to fire Hubert Davis. I'm not actually serious, but it just I just don't really believe that if RJ Davis and Cormac Ryan had each gone 4 of 18 and 4 of 12, that it would have looked any different. Like, I think they just got lucky that both of those guys had awesome games at the same time. Like, if they just have like more normal games, I guess that's a relatively normal game for RJ Davis. But if Cormac Ryan,
RJ Davis has been doing that pretty consistently here.
But if Cormac Ryan is just like 6 of 12, then this game looks even like this game isn't particularly close. So I don't know. I don't really know how to feel about North Carolina a month and a half into the season. They have like they like have 3 good players every night in some combination, and it never feels like everybody else like the rest of them are like I think it's just that like they seem to have 3 good players every night. And sometimes it's 3 different players, but some of that like they were 8 of 24 from the 3-point line, and that was with RJ Davis and Cormac Ryan going 7 of 16. So that everybody else was 1 of 8. And like RJ Davis, like there are like 3 other guys on this team that were supposed to knock down 3-pointers.
Mhm.
And that doesn't really seem to be happening. Paxton Wojcik is like the definition of I am unsure about anybody going from the mid-major to the high major level.
Yep.
Like he's the poster child this year. So we'll see. Like, I mean, of course, they're 9th in the country this year, which is impressive. It's hard to be 9th in the country when you didn't start top 10 and you've got 3 losses on December 17th and you were top 10 in the AP. It's impressive. Good stuff. Good stuff. I guess it helps to have North Carolina staple to cross your chest. But yeah, I think it'd be totally fair if you were optimistic about North Carolina still, and it would be totally fair if you were like, I'm not totally sure about North Carolina. I would think it's fair to be on either side of the aisle with the Tar Heels right now.
Yeah, it's weird because it clearly fits much better than last season. And the chemistry is clearly much better than last season.
Mhm.
But what does that actually mean?
I think that's fair.
And with what Caleb Love is doing, did you end up losing more than we gave it, acknowledged? I still think the answer is no, that it was in everybody's best interest to go their separate ways. Different conversation. But what does it mean for North Carolina? I think that's really ultimately the question that we still never really knew the answer to. What does it mean for North Carolina to be good this season? Relative to what? Are you expecting them to be a top 10 team? Maybe they are. I would probably lean on the side of they're not. But this is also a team that missed the tournament last season.
Mm-hmm.
They've played a tough schedule and they're doing just fine. They're easily a top 25 team. Does that mean good? It's a very strange. And they had the one game where they scored 100 points.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I was like, would we be thinking about North Carolina? Like, how differently would we be talking about North Carolina if they'd either lost that game or won it like, I don't know, like 72-69? Like, if it hadn't been this like offensive explosion, like, kind of felt like by the end of that game, everyone was watching it. It's like, oh my gosh, North Carolina just put up 100 on Tennessee. Like, would it be different? Because other than that, they have a win over an Arkansas team that's just bad. That barely beat Lipscomb and kind of got handled by Oklahoma in the last 7 days. Like that's what Arkansas has done. So yeah, it's but they did have that game, and so yeah, they're an interesting case study right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
And I have no idea how they're really going to factor into the ACC. Like they could go and win it. They could also
right, because who else?
Stump.
Are we to the point where it's Miami? I mean,
no, I refuse to let it be Miami. I don't know who it is, but
right,
it's not.
It's a process of elimination.
But the front runner is not Miami. I refuse to concede that.
I would still probably, if you're asking me today, say North Carolina wins it.
North Carolina is number 1 at KenPom. Is the top ACC team at KenPom.
Yeah.
You want to guess where they are right now? You want to guess where they are? They are the number 1 team at KenPom. 20. There's not a top 20. There's not a top 19 KenPom team for the ACC.
I'm not sure there's a top 15 team in the country in the ACC. It's strange.
And Clemson lost to a good game against Memphis, but that was your other team in the top 15.
Right. Forgot about that.
Oh, my bad. Duke is 12th. Sorry. Duke is just so far down because now we're at the point where the ACC like conference page is ordered by conference record, and Duke has lost their only conference game.
Yeah.
So
I take a fundamental issue with Duke still being 12. So
that's fair. I also don't have any issues. I don't have issues with that. But I also understand when they lost to Arizona and then Arkansas and Georgia Tech in true road games. So like I also kind of understand why they're based on where they started the season.
Yeah, it just hasn't been long, and we can react quicker than KenPom can. That's fair.
87-83, going back to Kentucky beating North Carolina. Real quick, is Kentucky the best team in the SEC, or is that still Tennessee for you?
Ooh. Right now, I'll still say Tennessee.
I think it's much closer on December 17th than we thought it was going to be. And it wouldn't have been Kentucky I would have picked to be challenging Tennessee for that throne if I were to pick before the season started. I would still take Tennessee just because I still think that, all of the things we've talked about Tennessee and Dalton Connect. I still think Tennessee's the better team. But Kentucky is quickly approaching.
And the more consistent team as well. That would ultimately be the tiebreaker for me. It's on a game-to-game basis. I have more trust in Tennessee, assuming Dalton Connect stays healthy.
If the NCAA tournament started today,
no, still Tennessee. Still Tennessee.
Okay.
Although, if I'm putting, those might be 2 of the 5 teams I'm most confident in right now. If I'm making a projection forward toward March, in all honesty.
I don't think that's a crazy thing to say.
Definitely 2 of the top. If you said pick 10 teams, definitely both are in there for me.
It's a pretty good point. Okay, last but not least, Kansas 75, Indiana 71. A game that IU led by 8 after 20 minutes. Listen, Josh, you know how I feel about Indiana. But it's hard to argue that when a big boy walks into Simon Scott Assembly Hall, that there are not very many, if any, environments in the college game right now that bring it the way that that Assembly Hall does when a big game is on the schedule. I didn't get to catch a lot of this game, but from what I heard, from what I saw on Twitter, it was an elite atmosphere and is a place that's really, really hard to win at this point, even when it's a team like Kansas that nobody is arguing Indiana being in the same stratosphere as Kansas is. They controlled this game for large chunks, but ultimately it was a Bill Self team, a veteran college basketball team with really, really good players, ultimately finding their way back to win by 4.
Well, yeah, I went for a run, and so as I was coming back, I checked the score, and it was early in the second half, and Indiana was still, I think, up double digits. And I looked at the box score, and I went, oh, well, that explains it. Kansas's top 2 guys were both, I don't remember what the numbers were, but not shooting the ball well at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they finished 11 of 27. But they got 38 points because Kevin McCullough kept going to the free throw line at the end of the game.
Yeah.
They showed up in the final 8 or so minutes and made the plays needed to get back in this game. It just doesn't need to be more complicated than that. When they are bad, Kansas is bad. Then they were the best 2 players on the floor, arguably. And Indiana just doesn't. Trey Galloway gave
You should
everything he
never lose a
possibly
game
had.
when Trey Galloway has 28 on 12 of 17. You should never.
He did everything he possibly could. He kept this game close, and credit to Indiana that even when Kansas did assert their dominance, Indiana made enough plays to give themselves a chance. Galloway had an open 3 that he missed after the possession I think it was right after he hit one to keep him in the game. That would have been big. They had the weird deflection that got reviewed, and Kansas got the ball that may or may not have still been in. It was a whole thing. They had a couple breaks that just didn't go their way that could have made this a one possession. Last team with the ball is going to either win or lose the game based on whether they make a shot, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas just made a couple more plays down the stretch. DeJuan Harris took 9 shots, made a couple big ones. We keep harping on that.
12 points. That's all.
Yep.
Like give me 9. Just don't give me I don't want to ever see 3 from you in the box. Never.
It wasn't necessarily pretty from Kansas, but ultimately by the end of the game, they got to where they needed to with their big players.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing for Indiana, as good as Trey Galloway was, that starting lineup is not good enough to survive with 3 bench points.
Yeah, especially without Xavier Johnson.
Right. And that is part of this, that you get to move pieces around and bring somebody else off the bench when you have him.
Yeah, Gabe Cupps is not yet a starting point guard at the Big Ten level. I mean, he clearly does a lot of things well, and if he's at Indiana for 4 years, he will be like he'll be part of the reason if Indiana in 3 years is picked to win the Big Ten. Like Gabe Cupps will probably be part of the reason why. But at this point, being able to bring a guy in like that off the bench is a much more advantageous position to be in.
You just it's not like this is an elite starting five that you can
definitely
ride with without any help.
Agreed.
And that's right, with Trey Galloway having the best game of probably his basketball career, at least his college career.
That might be right. Now I don't know. Maybe
he
Trey
dropped
Galloway
52 in high school. Who knows?
I'm sure like all of them probably did, right? But that's probably on the short list. I think the same thing remains true with Kansas. Like you're gonna get you like McCullough, Dickinson, and Adams are going to they're gonna get there. However, they need to get there. Like if it means getting 21 points on 16 free throw attempts, like McCullough's probably going to get to somewhere between 17 and 21 points. Like he's just going to make it happen. And it feels like you can depend on KJ Adams to get you somewhere between 10 and 15 pretty much every night. It's like somebody else has to, if it's DeJuan Harris, awesome. Like on this particular game, it was DeJuan Harris, and they got pretty much nothing from anybody else. But it just you need one more guy to be there every night, and it can rotate. I mean, I'd love for it to be DeJuan Harris every night, but in the scoring department, it's just not going to be. DeJuan Harris, Marco Jackson, Johnny Furphy has had some nice games off the bench. It just needs to be somebody outside of those three guys, because, I mean, like I said, Assembly Hall is absolutely the sixth man kind of thing here. It's hard to win there in Bloomington. But on the flip side of that same coin, you probably shouldn't need to stress as much as you did to beat Indiana. It's just not that good of a basketball team, and they're missing the guy that they can put the ball in his hands and trust that he's going to make a good decision in Xavier Johnson. And that's probably part of why that Indiana ended up not winning this game, is because they didn't have that guy to be able to put the ball in his gut and say, get 4 yards for us over and over again. But yeah, interesting game. Mm-hmm. Anything else on this game? Anything else you saw on Saturday, men's or women's? You got anything else?
Just big day overall for the Big Ten on the men's side. We've talked about most of the games, but also Ohio State beats UCLA. Purdue gets the statement win. Michigan State shows up. Indiana has a good performance that comes up a little bit short, but they were controlling most of that game.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't have that many opportunities left to solidify your conference. So for the Big Ten to have this kind of day on such a big day for the sport, that to me ultimately is the winner. It's just the Big Ten as a whole. And then you also mentioned that I wanted to mention that Memphis knocked off Clemson. So you've got a couple undefeated teams that took a stumble. Houston almost lost, but found a way to survive the Fighting Wade Taylor IV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of those things were things I was going to mention. That Memphis adding Naquan Tomlin is like that. They haven't yet, but that's one of the more interesting, as we turn the page to 2024. That's one of the more interesting stories in the sport, because Memphis, is clearly talented, clearly a top 25 caliber team. And, Tomlin is the type of guy that, maybe it will just throw a wrinkle in there that makes them stumble. Maybe it turns them into the final form of themselves. We'll see, but Memphis has done enough over the last month and a half to make that a very, very intriguing question as we head into conference play. What does that team ultimately turn into over the next couple months? And like you said, Houston did exactly what I expect a Houston team that nobody talks about to do. They didn't do anything impressive, so no one's going to lead with it on a podcast. I mean, we're 59 minutes and 40 seconds into this podcast, and we just now mentioned Houston for the first time. That's one of the like handful of teams in the country that's still undefeated. You know, like in the top 50, let's see, how far do we have to go? In the top 70 of KenPom, there are 3 undefeated teams. One of them's Houston. Would you like to guess the other 2? That's a fun game.
Yeah, see, now I'm trying to think. BYU?
No. BYU is 10-1. BYU has a loss to Utah.
Oh, right.
You have a Big 12 team and a mid-major.
Oh, Oklahoma's 1.
Yep.
Forgot about them. They're going to be a top 10 team tomorrow.
Shouts to the Sooners, the Fighting Porter Mosers.
It's a mid-major.
Mid-major that has a significant win in your neck of the woods this season.
Oh, right. Top 25 team, James Madison.
That's correct. James Madison is 68th at KenPom. Those are the only 3 teams in the top 70 with 0 wins. Ole Miss, if you go all the way. It is impressive to be an SEC team and be undefeated and only be 90th at KenPom. That's impressive.
Yeah. I forgot. Yeah, they're still there too. Yeah, we talked. Yeah, they just all right. And James Madison too. It is kind of funny that a team that was expected to be good make the NCAA tournament this season. They go and they beat Michigan State. Everybody freaks out and puts them in the top 25. And I just watch their scores all the time, and they're just kind of eking out wins. You know, they're down in the first half. They end up winning by 8 or 12, but they just keep winning. So they just keep staying in the top 25, no matter what it looks like. It just makes me laugh.
Outside of Michigan State, James Madison has not played another team inside the top 100 at KenPom.
Right. I think they had a couple overtime, at least one overtime game in there.
They needed 2 overtimes 3 days after Michigan State to beat Kent State.
Right.
They have wins. They beat Radford by 3. They beat Southern Illinois by 6. The rest of them have been pretty convincing. They beat Keystone, a non-D1 school, 130-59. Sure.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Sure.
It just makes me laugh.
They might go undefeated, dude.
Oh, absolutely.
They only play App State is 77th at KenPom right now. That is the only team. That is the only currently top 170 KenPom team they play left on their schedule. They're projected. They are favored in all games left except on the road at App State. They are projected to go 27-3. There you go.
And it'll be interesting. I mean, from a resume standpoint, we don't need to get into all of this, but from a resume standpoint, if let's say they lose once or they go undefeated and Michigan State is just meh.
Yeah.
That's your signature win? A average Big Ten team? That's very different than you
That's
going
been
into
in the top 25 all year. Because if they only lose once, they'll be in the top 25 all year.
Right. That's very different than you went into the building of the preseason number 4 team.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be the second best team in the Big Ten and beat them and didn't lose to anybody.
Yeah.
There's a lot of optic stuff that's very interesting depending on how the season plays out for both of those teams in terms of how the committee views James Madison.
Yeah. Because you could have a week where like some teams right in front of you lose and you just kind of keep on rolling and you end up like 13th in the country.
Right.
And yeah, there could very easily be a world where a top 25 team literally all season, like maybe they stumble late in the year. And then if they don't win their conference tournament, like that's a top 25 team that doesn't have an at-large resume.
You're just going to have to hope that, right, if you win 32 games, that it's going to, and one of them was at the Breslin Center, that it's going to be enough.
Right. But it's not a foregone conclusion that it would be. It's interesting. All right. Anything else?
That's all I got.
That's all I got as well. We are on the doorstep, ladies and gentlemen, of conference play. I believe Tuesday is kind of the official everyone starts playing conference games day. Yeah, it'll be cool. There's a couple of interesting. Well, James Madison is going to get a test against 1-11 Coppin State, so put that one on the schedule. But Virginia is at Memphis. That's another interesting game for the Tigers. Marquette on the road at Providence. Those are your top 25 games on Tuesday. Anyways, it'll be interesting. We'll get into conference play, back to some weekly Under 8 podcast stuff We'll have a grand old time, and we'll see you very soon. Please subscribe to both Jays for Days and the Under 8. Same podcast feed, same YouTube channel, all under the same umbrella. You follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll be back Monday evening. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.